Yay! We are the Chicago Brain Buddies, sponsored by the Chicago Society for Neuroscience, ChicagoSFN.org. I am Aaron Freeman, comedian in residence for the Chicago Society for Science and Technology. And who are you?
My name is Peggy Mason, and I'm a professor of neurobiology at University of Chicago.
Yay!
Okay, so last week, you remember that we talked about plants doing their best nervous system imitation. And so this has led us to think about, well, okay, what the heck is a nervous system good for? Why bother making a nervous system?
They're very expensive.
They're expensive. Everything's expensive. So why bother?
Well,
Aaron, why would you make a nervous system? You are an organism. You're a living organism.
Right.
To have a nervous system or not have a nervous system? What's going to be the deciding factor?
Well, okay, as a human being, I have a bias because I'm a human being, so I can experience the joys and pleasures of the world. I can look at onto the gorgeous countenance of my buddy Peggy Mason. I can taste great foods. I can experience the sensation of sunlight on my body. I would have a nervous system because it brings me pleasure. That's my human bias. I mean, all
right. So why? Let's put it this way: why does a mosquito have a nervous system? Why does a leech have a nervous system?
Nervous systems have evolved because they have aided in the life, sustenance, and reproduction of organisms that possess them.
Well, that must be true. That's the way evolution works.
Except that it actually doesn't always.
Can you be more specific? How does it aid them? What does a nervous system do that the other organ systems don't do?
What does the nervous system do that it allows me to sense and respond to opportunities and dangers in my environment?
Excellent. And now let's think about that beautiful tree that I'm looking at right there.
Okay.
Do plants sense their environment and react to their environment?
You know, I watched the Brain Buddies podcast from last week. The Brain Buddy. I know this already. I know that certain.
Okay, let's rule out Madame Mimosa. Okay.
You got this.
Ye old oak tree.
Okay.
Ye old oak tree. Does ye old oak tree respond to the environment?
Not so far as I could say with any confidence. Ye old oak tree, as far as I know, is stuck. It sits there. It does not go anywhere. It does not, where you're going is, it does not have, nor does it need a nervous system. Ye old oak.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
Let's say that I could cover a bunch of the oak tree so that only one part of the oak tree was open to the sunlight.
Right. Able to expose.
Would the oak tree respond to this change in its environment?
I would say that the only part of the oak tree that would respond would be the part that wasn't covered.
So, in other words, the oak tree is any plant is going to grow towards light.
Yes. Any part
from the oak tree. But if you have a little plant and you have a window over there, though the plant's gonna go towards.
I saw Brain Buddies last week. I saw this. I know this happens. I got it. Okay. I totally got it.
So is that a nervous system?
Well, this was the debate, right? Because the nervous system really is an arrogance that people like you brain-centric, you brain-philic people, you just think, oh, well, I know what a nervous system is. It's got neurons and axons and transfers of electrochemical energy, and that's what a nervous system is. But as we talked about before, that's not the only thing it's not the only way to respond to your environment is to have what we recognize as a nervous system.
That is correct. So also another example of a organism that responds to its environment are bacteria. They will go towards things that they like and go away from chemicals that they find noxious.
That's true.
So there's plenty of ways in which organisms that don't possess a nervous system, a specialized organ, a specialized set of tissues that serves a nervous function. There are plenty of ways in which organisms can respond to the environment without a nervous system. And I want to push back at one thing. I may be a nervous system chauvinist, but I am not a brain chauvinist. I actually love the peripheral nervous system. And I not only love the peripheral nervous system, but there are many animals that don't have a brain. And in fact, the first brain, which is the title of a book by our friend One Pagan, published by Oxford University Press a few years ago, is a really good read. It talks about flatworms, which are the first group of animals to develop a concentrated group of neurons that we call a brain. So there's a lot of nervous function that's not brain related.
Well, but as far as
so where were we, Aaron?
Our topic for today arises.
Okay, so now why bother having a nervous system?
Well,
so it's not so that you can react to things, because you can do that without a nervous system.
Fair enough. But specifically, there's a specific critter that you turned me on to that was the inspiration for today's little chat.
And what did you learn from tell us about the critter.
Okay, fair enough. My good buddy Peggy, my partner Peggy, says, let's talk about the sea squirt, which is unique and interesting among animals because it has a brain for a while, and then during a process of metamorphosis, it eats its own brain in the weirdest version of zombieism I could possibly imagine.
Okay, so when does it have the brain and when does it eat its brain?
So when it's born, it has a sort of quasi tadpole state where it swims around.
It looks like a tadpole.
It looks like a tadpole.
It looks like a tadpole. It acts like a tadpole.
And it can see, and it makes choices. It makes choices as to where it wants to rest its head. But once it rests its head once it's made that choice, that's it. It will never ever move again.
So then it does a big plant imitation. I'm an animal. I'm going to make like a plant.
And what
happened? Here for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and
that's what it does.
Which is fine. That I'm totally down with that. I understand that. I'm perfectly happy with that. But then it does this other thing.
What's the other thing?
It eats its brain. What is
so? This is the sea squirt. Is not only is the sea squirt an animal, but you could say, oh, maybe the sea squirt is one of those really primitive animals. The sea squirt is not a primitive. It is a chordate. Okay, we are chordates. It is closer to us than it is to, say, the octopus or the fly or the worm. It is one step away from being a vertebrate. It is a chordate. So what chordate means is that at some point during development, there's something called a notochord, which is essentially a neural tube.
Which is what we all have when we're first developing our nervous systems. We humans.
Right. So it's very similar to that. It's this notochord. And eventually in vertebrates, that notochord will become a vertebral column. But in the sea squirt, it doesn't do that. And in other non-vertebrate chordates, it doesn't become a vertebral column. It just is this organized nervous system. But in the sea squirt, it uses that to guide its swimming in this tadpole-like stage to find where it's going to rest. Then it's going to plant itself, do this basically plant imitation. And then, as long as I'm a plant, I might as well eat the stuff that's around in the environment. And my tail has now become basically a piece of the environment, so I'm going to eat my tail.
What a
And
bizarre.
so that's how the sea squirt life cycle goes. And I think what it tells us, what would you say that tells us?
Well, it seems fairly obvious that it consumes that of which its brain was composed, because there's no need for it. Once you have planted yourself, and there's no utility to sensing or responding to one's environment, it's use it or lose it. And if there's no need,
okay, so let's put that. Can you put it in a positive way? So what do they use their
brains are good to eat?
No, what are brains good for? Why do they keep the brain? They keep the brain.
Okay. Yes, in order to move.
Brains are all about moving. So the sensing thing, it's nice, but you don't need the nervous system to do the sensing thing. You need it to go do the moving thing.
So now, as we talk, this reminds me of what you said, told me, and you will remind me of who said it, was the central fundamental question of neuroscience, which was, why do anything?
Right. So this is Donald Pfaff, Pfaff, a good friend of mine from Rockefeller University, who's done amazing work so he started his career trying to answer the question, why do anything? And the way he put it to me, he says, you could be on the couch for the rest of your life and occasionally eat and be fine, but you don't. You get up and you do other things. You talk to friends, you pet your cat, you make a cup of tea, you type out a story, you etc. So all of these things, why do you do any of them? And so in order to try and answer that question, Don started out trying to figure out what was the neural structure that led to sexual behavior. That's a motivated behavior. People go have sex. So animals go have sex. He was trying to figure out what makes these animals go have sex, and as a window into motivation and drive to do something. Now he's turned his attention more to states of arousal and why do you get into these states where you actually act versus these other states where you're very quiescent. And so I think that that's a really fundamental thing around which the nervous system is built. Why do anything? And one of the big reasons is for internal reasons. I paint a painting because I'm internally motivated to paint a painting. I do other things because of stimuli that come in. When the doorbell rings, I open the door. When the phone rings, I answer the phone. And then there are other parts of the brain which are involved with making sure that the different muscles play well with each other. There's multiple things you could do I could do lots of different things with this hand, but I can only do one thing at a time. And so somebody has to decide. And so we get a whole part of the brain that's dedicated to what's called action selection. But the organizing principle around making the nervous system very serving voluntary movement, deliberate movement, self-generated movement, that's a consistent way to see the nervous system.
But so the nervous system is really just about movement and doing stuff.
That's the key, yes or no. And then it's broadened out from that. There's so many other things that the nervous system gets involved in, serving peristalsis, which eventually does serve movement, because if you didn't digest your nutrients, you wouldn't be able to move.
Can I say this particular? So the story of the sea squirt. So it has its little nervous system. It wiggles its little tail. It looks around and makes certain decisions about where to be. Then it plants itself there, and then what for us would be peristalsis, the movement of nutrients through the digestive system, that role is taken over by the currents of the water whence the sea squirt lives.
Yeah.
So one way or another,
Yeah.
you have to move nutrients through your body. You have to have metabolism. You have to change the nutrients into energy for your body. But that you don't, we have this enteric nervous system that works very hard to create peristalsis and move things through our body to kind of churn the various foods that we have through our bodies. But you don't need a nervous system in order to have what the sea squirt shows us is we don't need a nervous system to move those things through our bodies. That we don't need that an entity doesn't need need peristalsis. Or
that's right. And in fact, both plants move things through their trunks and stems and so on, and the sponge also moves things through itself without the aid of a neural net that's producing any type of movement of the it's just water flow, as you say.
No, but then you said about you're not a brain chauvinist, even though you are a nervous system chauvinist. But now Trina mentioned about that, and I don't know, octopi. Do they have their brains, or is there a distributed nervous system?
Oh, octopus has a brain. Octopus has a very respectable brain. They have a lot of neurons. Octopus, which is the animal that it's a cephalopod, along with squid and nautilus. But in particular, the squid and the octopus are clever animals, and the octopus in particular has so many neurons. It has so many cells in its brain that it has developmental mechanisms that are different from what most invertebrates use, because it can't use the simple mechanisms to let me be more specific. So, for example, there's a worm called C. elegans. And the C stands for cannabinoidus. I'm going to butcher that, but whatever. C. elegans it's a little nematode, and it has 302 neurons. The larval stage, and so we know where each one of those neurons came from, and essentially it's one cell divides into these two cells, and that cell divides into these two cells, and it's just this hierarchy. And from that hierarchy, just within a few generations, you can get 302 cells. But that is not possible with the number of neurons that are in the octopus brain, or the octopus nervous system, the brain, as well as the nervous system that's contained within the arms. And so it uses mechanisms that are much more similar to what we use in invertebrate brains. And that's being studied by my colleague and friend, Cliff Ragsdale.
Wow.
It's really fun work.
It seems to me that the among the practical lessons to be taken from the sea squirt, and I'm positive that I'm wrong about this, and I think we've talked about this before, and you told me I was wrong, but that it appears that use it or lose it seems to be a lesson that one can take, because the squirt, once it plants itself and no longer has a need to identify a location or move to a better location, that is what, and again, some of the homework I've done since you told me about this, it appears to imply that if you don't use those neural pathways, use those brains, use those systems, they get kind of consumed. And in fact,
so I think that the use it or lose it conception is accurate for evolution. In other words, if you have this system, if some human developed a horn right here, if that horn never gave that human an evolutionary advantage, then eventually the horn would go away. Bye-bye, horn. Well, it's the same thing for this sea squirt. During the point at which it's sessile and doing its best plant imitation, the nervous system is not giving it any evolutionary advantage, and possibly giving it a disadvantage. So whichever sea squirt then started to absorb its own nervous system, then had an advantage over the ones that didn't. And so it evolved that way. But that's a very different thing than saying for you, if you decided one day not to use your left arm, that you would sort of lose your nervous representation of your left arm. So within the context of a single lifetime versus the context of evolution, those are two different things.
Wait. But I mean, if I don't, like I'm 61 years old, if I don't use my muscles, if I don't go out and exercise, those muscles will atrophy. Those
they're not nervous tissues, but the
innervation of those systems will cease to function as well. I won't be able to No.
The innervation will stay the same. But on the other hand, let's say you didn't have the innervation, or the innervation was very disrupted, as can be in the case in certain types of, say, cerebral palsy. And then in that situation, there is it's not used, that let's say a limb is not used, that limb tends to shrink. You don't lose the limb, but it becomes smaller. It's smaller than, let's say there's one affected limb, the other limb will be larger than the affected limb.
But okay, we talk about the sea slug, which, by the way, we are the Chicago Brain Buddies. Professor Peggy Mason of the University of Chicago. I'm Aaron Freeman, artist in residence for the Chicago Council for Science and Technology. We are here courtesy of the Chicago Society for Neuroscience, chicagosfn.org. But my friend Peggy Mason, my hero and mentor Peggy Mason, has forever slapped me around about the cerebellum, which is all about repetition and the learning through repetition and the conditioning through repetition. So explain to me why this is not relevant to the notion of use it or lose it. Because
it's you don't lose a body structure, you'll lose a circuit, you'll lose practice, but you will be able to, okay, I'll give you a great example. I played the flute when I was a kid. I stopped playing the flute for 25 years. When I picked up the flute again, I could play the notes without thinking about it. I didn't use it for 25 years, but I didn't lose those circuits. I had to remember, there were a few of the weird flats and sharps that I had to remind myself of, but, C, the key of C was, that was not a problem.
Well, to your point, as I said before, Nietzsche said that the existence of forgetting has yet to be proven. We only know there are some things we can't recall when we want to. So you're saying, hey, Nietzsche wasn't all bad. Nietzsche had some.
That's pretty good.
Well, but that's what you're saying. You're saying that it's not that the nervous connections are lost. So by disuse, it's not a question of use it or lose it in terms of the nervous system. It's merely a question of the kind of the musculature, but not the innervation of the musculature, and that the cerebellar connections and programming and practicing don't go away. We lost Professor. We lost Peggy, but now I think she's back. She's going to be back in just a moment. Thank you very much. We lost you. I don't know why, but
yeah, I don't know why either. Okay, so
use it or lose it. We're talking
use it or lose it, and so in terms of synapses, there is a role for a activity dependent enhancement or degradation of synapses. Now you can see me, Loani, right?
Wait, what do you mean? Say that again. There's a role.
Well, we're getting a little far off from C-squirt land, but I think in terms of C-squirts, yes, if something evolves and it is not useful, then it is ripe for something else to evolve, some other mechanism to evolve. And in this case, what evolved was, okay, I'm going to use this tissue, this organ, this notochord, but I'm only going to use it for a short time.
So
and then once it becomes no longer useful or advantageous to my life, I'm gonna actually make it advantageous by eating it.
So what you're saying is, in an evolutionary sense,
yeah,
there was an evolutionary advantage to sea slugs who would consume their own brains and use it for nutrients rather than maintain that brain, and
which is not doing anything.
Which is not
doing anything at that time in the life cycle.
Right, because what it needs the nervous system for is to move, and since it's no longer moving,
it's done on the moving thing.
Right. So there's an advantage. So that you could imagine that there were somehow, if there were sea squirts that maintained and gave all that energy to their nervous systems, they would be at an evolutionary disadvantage.
Right.
To sea slugs who would just consume their nervous system.
Right.
Yeah. So okay.
So I think that's just it's just a really interesting take home message because I think we have a lot of bias towards perception.
Yeah, well,
right. We think perception's so glorious, and it is. It's extremely. It makes life very enjoyable. It's really wonderful to be able to hear a symphony or look out on a beautiful view or see a beautiful piece of art. All of those things are really nice, but they are not what the nervous system probably evolved to do. Probably what it evolved to do is to allow us to move in the world, and that's interesting.
And so, but there's
that's the core function of the nervous system,
and that's why we need to have it. That's why we have one. That's why we need to have one. It's why we continue. Yeah. Now, let me just say before this has been a lovely chat here. The time has flown by, but we want to thank all our little buddies. But anybody who's got any questions, I'm sure that Peggy would be very happy to address any questions.
Well, also, I think it's really fun. I love the way people comment on Facebook. I don't know, for some reason that doesn't so much happen on YouTube, but on Facebook anyway, there's a lot of comments that we can have discussions about, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, yeah, because so Loani makes a point here that that behavior is a movement function. I mean, behavior is movement. I mean, once the sea squirts cease. Well, although is it? That's an interesting question. Is it fair to say that the processing of nutrients is movement? I mean, it is movement it's a kind of internal.
No, personally, I put that in a different category. I put that in the peristalsis category.
Wait, but peristalsis is movement.
It's not outwardly directed movement.
All right, so now we're good. Okay.
It's internal movement. So yeah.
It's not outwardly.
That's the way I would think about that.
So
these are, to a certain extent, these are all arguable points.
Well, to a certain extent, these are terms of art, how we're defining behavior, how we're defining movement. But again, for the sea slugs, what's interesting is about the sea squirts, not slugs, not squirts. Sea slugs is what my buddy Bill.
Squirts.
Sea slugs is what my buddy Bill Frost over at Rosalind Franklin talks about.
Right.
But in terms of the sea squirts, when its brain ceases to be, and it is evolved, the sea squirts we have now have evolved such that when their brains cease to be of survival value, they're gone.
Right.
And there's no use it or lose it.
And it's not being used to look at that beautiful sunset.
Not so far as we know. Look, it's beautiful.
Hey, Aaron, check out that really nice current over there.
Well, we don't know
what's coming down the line.
That's true. All right. So the answer to the question is, why have a nervous system? What is the answer to that question? Why have bother with the nervous system?
Move.
Move. All right, fair enough. So
let's move. Actually, Michelle Obama.
I was about to say it. That's right. Let's move, Michelle Obama. All right. Well, thank you so much. We are the Chicago Brain Buddies. We're here every Thursday. We're going to be here next. Wait, what is it? In a world. Wait, what did she say?
It's in May next Thursday.
It's in May. That's right. Wait, what Luani says? In a world that's making us easier to live, why do we think we lose brain mass over Do we lose brain mass over time?
Well, yeah, but within a lifetime. What we've been talking about really is about evolutionary time. But within a lifetime, it's a different matter. We can talk about that next time.
But yeah, so the brain mass that gets consumed, the C-squirt brain mass, is not really connected to the loss in cognitive function and loss of brain function that we humans observe over time. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
All right, fair enough. Well, it's always a loss when I don't get to talk to you. So I hope that we will. How's that for a segue? Come on, that's a good thing. So it's always.
I'm liking your notochord, okay?
No, thank you very much.
Well, actually, your notochord's long gone. I'm liking the results of your notochord.
All right. Well, we are the Chicago Brain Buddies, brought to you by the Chicago Society for Neuroscience. I'm Aaron Freeman with the Chicago Council for Science and Technology. Peggy Mason of the University of Chicago. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for watching live. Thanks for watching on the replay later on. And we'll be back here next week. Thank you, Peggy. All right. See you guys soon. They're so adorable. This is so much fun.